Today I'm going to give you a redacted, G-rated version of the hair that we see or don't see on statues that are 2,500 years old. That's right, classical antiquities whose marble, dangly bits broke the algorithm. So yeah, I think I'm being shadow banned. I'm still new to YouTube, I don't really know, I'm figuring this stuff out, but usually my videos get like a few hundred views, and in fact my Egyptian hair down there video was my best performing video. It got over 1,000 views, it got loads of likes, it got a bunch of new subscribers, so I was really excited to be putting out my ancient Greek hair down there video. I thought it was a similar subject to the Egyptian one, so people would still be interested, and plus I was totally proud of it. I thought I did really good research and excellent storytelling, and I thought it was one of my best videos. But it's been several days and I've only had like 40 views on it, and I put out a couple of other videos at around the same time that were like short versions of the same, and tumbleweeds, crickets, nothing. So it's a little bit disappointing that the algorithm isn't offering my video to anyone who might be interested. The topic is ancient Greek art, the kind of stuff that's in every good museum, that's shown on PBS and the BBC, and it's supposed to be the foundation of our culture, right? When you post a video to YouTube, you get asked whether it's made for children or not, and I always say, no, it's not made for children, that's my default. And at that point, you get asked whether you need to put an age restriction, and I never do that. I think what I'm showing is culturally significant, factually presented, and relevant to anybody who has a body. It's not made for children because I think they'd be bored by it, but not because I think anything in it is damaging or wrong to show them. Yeah, I'm trying to radicalize them into thinking about art history and how hair is culturally significant. I think there is far more dangerous and controversial stuff on this platform. So what I've done today is a bit of an experiment. I've put a bunch of cutesy demure stickers all over the video, and I've bleeped out every time I use actual word to describe a particular body part rather than a euphemism. So you're going to have to use your imagination to understand what I'm talking about half the time. In the video I talk about the Aphrodite of Knidos, a marble statue from classical Greece. And as she shows us, when you try to cover something up, you actually call more attention to it than if you didn't do that in the first place. Things that weren't naughty at all suddenly become suggestive.
Do you want a snowman?
So even though in my videos I'm speaking calmly and factually about a subject that all of us share, I guess it's just too much. That's me, a little too much. It's nothing new, people demanding fig leaves to protect their sensitive eyes from scandalous material. Here's how the Vatican Museum handled that Aphrodite of Knidos up until the 1930s. They wrapped her in lead drapery to protect her modesty, or to reinforce our inability to talk about the human body unless it's sensationalized and scandalized. So let's see if this squeaky clean version of my ancient Greek video does any better than the one that was dripping with junk. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this. Please leave comments below. Let me know what you think of YouTube's policies, how I'm handling it, what I might have done better or differently. I would really love a sense check here. Anywho, roll 'em. Today I'm going to tell you about ancient Greek hair. Now I know what you must be thinking. You're saying to yourself, I've seen some statues in my day. Obviously, the males have hair and the females don't. Well, it is not that simple, so let's really comb through all the data before we reach any hasty conclusions. First, let me orient you. If you're American. If you're British, I'll orientate you.
For me, this is really important because we're dealing with a whole bunch of different civilizations and centuries, and I get confused.
Greek art can be broken down into the Archaic period, the Classical period, and the Hellenistic period. There were also periods that came beforehand, but I'm going to ignore those because it's my channel and I can do that. So the Archaic period is very influenced by Egyptian art. They were neighbors and they were dealing with each other all the time. Their fates are actually inextricably linked because the Egyptian civilization ends in 30 BC when Cleopatra is conquered by the Romans, and that too is the end of the Greek civilization. So starting with the Archaic period, it is filled with these sculptures of Kouros, singular, or koroi is plural. They're these naked male figures. They're very straight, upright, and facing forward with one leg in front, usually the left leg. They are typically standing in funeral grave marker sites,
And they're very based on the Egyptian standing figures. I mean, very based. Like, the proportions are exactly the same, the pose is the same, but there's a couple of differences. One, they don't have a background anymore. They're now freestanding, which is a lot harder to accomplish. More importantly, for our purposes, they're naked, whereas the Egyptian sculptures always were wearing a little kilt or a loincloth. These are naked, so we can see what they've got going on down there. There's a female counterpart to the koroi. Singular is koroi and plural is korai. They are always wearing clothes. So we're going to focus on the male kouros. They're meant to be just like beautiful, perfect, healthy, strapping, sexy young men. The Greeks really prized that moment in between boyhood and manhood, and that's what they're depicting here. They're just like these dumb, vacant, perfect teenage boys. And their are totally weird. They are stylized, abstracted, exaggerated. Let me show you a few. Here's a diagram by R. Smith, who's an art historian that documented the pubic hair of these koroi, in his view, evolve over time. He says that they start quite abstract and then later on they become more and more naturalistic. Obviously, my favorite is the Aristodikos Kouros because of his star-shaped pubic hair. He was found in the grave of a guy named Aristodikos, ergo the name Aristodikos Kouros. At this point, the musculature is starting to look a bit more naturalistic, but the most definitely are not. Point on top is sort of a very stylized treasure trail, essentially, but obviously totally geometric. So clearly this is a choice. They're able to make things look realistic if they want to, but they're choosing to show you these wacky It's basically him showing off. Aristodikos is saying, look at how fabulous I am. I am no ordinary man. I've got extraordinary He's showing his perfection and his wealth. He can afford to have these immaculately groomed, incredible hair. He's not wearing any other ornamentation, so his are his one chance to go big or go home. He's showing off. And talk about showing off, these might have been painted bright blue. I know, we think about Greek sculptures as being pure white. That's what we've always been shown and always been taught. But in reality, these were painted. There's a team in Germany led by a guy named Brinkmann who have been working for decades on re-establishing the kind of color that was on these ancient sculptures. I highly recommend you check out their website because it is fascinating. If you just search for gods in color, you'll find it. They've found the little traces of color that might be on some of these statues and then recreated it in full with sometimes various options saying, maybe it was this color, maybe it was that color, that sort of thing. You can see that it is beautifully colored with skin tone and hair and bright blue hair. I mean, check it out. The hair on the head is just humdrum black, but the pubes and the eyebrows and the nipple hair are blue. Clearly, this is being emphasized. This was a choice by these artists to say, looky here. I also just want to call attention to the nipples where the hairs are stylized like sun rays. I think that is really cool. Do nipples count as hair? For the sake of this video, I say yes. Eventually, the Archaic period winds down, the Classical period starts up. That also coincides with basically the rise of democracy and also the end of creating these koroi. But nude males continued to exist, no problem there, and they definitely have hair. They're really into the heroic male nude. But as democracy starts to flourish, so does the idea of every man, and so the become more naturalistic looking, although still very nicely coiffed with like beautiful little individual curls. Okay, I'm just going to point out the elephant in the room. Yes, the are small. That's because these are civilized Greeks. This is a choice. They want to show off how they are civilized in comparison to their barbarian neighbors, who might be depicted with larger machinery down there, and certain gods like Dionysus. But these are dignified men and gods, and they want to show that they are in control. They are dignified, they are civilized, and that's why they have small penises. Dignified men kept their penises under control. But I hear you say they had loads of porn. It's all over their vases. And that is true. It showed a lot of action, but you know what? That's the subject for a different video. I'm focusing mainly on sculpture here. So by the mid-5th century, democracy is in place, the koroi are out of fashion, and pubic hair on men is being depicted as naturalistic, but still very well coiffed. They're embracing natural masculinity, but still idealized, perfect, groomed tufts. It's still an unattainable beauty. So as we enter the classical period, we get democracy and we get contrapposto. Unlike the previous rigid, straight poses, these have an S-curve. They're putting all their weight on one foot, and then their spine naturally kind of curves the other way. One hip is higher, the opposite shoulder is higher, and this is canonized by a guy named Polykleitos, who created the Doryphoros, which shows you that contrapposto pose and the perfect proportion. This is where they invented the idea that a human body should be 7 head heights tall. So the classical period is like this idealized, perfect, but very naturalistic beauty. And this is when we get the first freestanding female nude statue. Ta-da! Finally, at long last, we can see a naked woman. Here she is. She's the Aphrodite of Knidos. You can see she's bathing. There's a big jug of water there, and she's either putting down or pulling up a towel or a robe or some sort of cloth. Bathing has a lot of significance for Aphrodite. It's what she does ritualistically before and after sex, and it's where she gets a lot of her magic. The way her hand is posed over her pubic region is called the Venus pudica pose, or modest Venus pose, because she's covering up her private part. But is she covering it, or is she calling attention to it? You know, she is not just any woman, she's Aphrodite. She is the goddess of love and sex and beauty. In fact, whenever you see a female nude in ancient Greek sculpture, she's a goddess. Mortal women were always depicted with clothes on, as opposed to men who might be depicted nude, whether they were a mortal man or a god. But nude female statues were always goddesses, usually Aphrodite. But even though she's the goddess of sex and love, the fact that she was nude was kind of scandalous at the time. Legend has it by Pliny the Elder, who was writing a couple of hundred years later, but still, he says that the artist Praxiteles had actually made 2 different versions of the sculpture. One was clothed and one was nude. And he offered them both to the people of the island of Kos, and they said, hell no, we don't want that naked one. We'll take the clothed one, please. And so, being dignified people, that's the one they got. But the people of Knidos were like, sure, we'll take that naked Aphrodite. It ended up being so popular, it was a tourist attraction. People would go to Knidos just to see the Aphrodite. And soon enough, every rich person with a villa had to have their own version. One art historian has counted at least 200 copies of it, and those are just the ones that we are aware of today. This was super duper popular. It was kind of like the idea of the Aphrodite of Knidos was more important than the actual Aphrodite of Knidos. So she was being copied for hundreds of years throughout the Hellenistic period, throughout the Roman period, and we don't even have the original sculpture anymore. We try to piece together what the original would have looked like based on all of these copies, but the original doesn't exist. Not only do we get direct copies of the Aphrodite of Knidos, but pretty much every nude female you'll see subsequently is inspired by it. So things like the Venus de Milo or Botticelli's Birth of Venus, they really owe a lot to this original female nude sculpture, the Aphrodite of Knidos, in terms of her pose and how she looks. So let's talk about how she looks. Let's close up right now on her pubic area, since that is my area of focus, and we will see that there is no there. It's totally flat. She's got like a Barbie. Honestly, I'm not sure why. Clearly, they were able to sculpt anything that they wanted to make it look as naturalistic as they liked. I mean, they had no problems with male hair or genitals. And if you look at her body, they seem to certainly have female models to work from. So it's not a matter of being unable to depict it. It's a choice. Some scholars have suggested that it would have been too sexually aggressive to depict a woman's genitals, and so this is basically a power play to keep women in their place. But she's no ordinary woman. This is a goddess, the goddess of sex. So that explanation doesn't really work for me. And then I think about the way that the penises are shown very small, and I wonder if this might be the same kind of thing, that, you know, they're trying to show themselves as more civilized. But diminishing is not the same as completely eradicating, so that doesn't quite satisfy me either. Maybe as a goddess, she's just so superior, she's post-vulva. You know, she doesn't need to be the goddess of sex. I don't know. That doesn't really ring true to me either. None of the historical documents seem to mention it. So obviously nobody then was weirded out by this. Nobody's going and saying like, hey, Praxiteles, I think you missed something there. In fact, all they ever do talk about is how realistic and how alluring she looks. Pliny the Elder tells a story of some guy who was so turned on by her that he left a stain on her thigh. Ugh. I have another theory that she had actually a neatly groomed layer of hair. Remember, these sculptures were painted at the time. We think of them as pure white, but actually they were colored to look realistic. And doesn't this look just so much more realistic if you put a little triangle right there? It suddenly makes sense why it's flat. In fact, a lot of female sculptures have been found with some traces of paint down there indicating pubic hair, or maybe with a really finely chiseled line indicating a So I think this is quite possible. I mean, with the hundreds of copies made of this Aphrodite, certainly some of the painters had to take it upon themselves to go and give her some p***s. And when we look at York Kouros, if we compare it side by side with the one that we can't see any paint on, we can see he looks like he's completely debilitated down there too. But actually he had bright blue p***s. So who's to say? Maybe the Aphrodite of Knidos had bright blue p***s. Certainly with all of those copies, some of the painters must have given her pubic hair. What we know about actual pubic hair grooming in ancient Greece is that it was a gendered thing. Women removed pubic hair and men did not. And how were they doing it? They were either plucking it or singeing it. Now, singeing it sounds horrible to me. It sounds dangerous, but we do see all these images on vase paintings of women singeing their hair. There's this one where you see a woman being helped by Eros. You know it's Eros because he has wings, and he is helping her to use an oil lamp to singe her hair. She's holding a sponge in case anything goes awry. I think that this must be Aphrodite because Eros wouldn't deign to spend his time helping remove the hair of anyone other than Aphrodite, his mother. And then that woman off to the side just looks like she's looking at her phone, waiting her turn. But we get most of her pubic hair lore from Aristophanes, who was writing comedies. And so nothing is better for a punchline than pubic hair, right? There's his character, the kinsman, who's an old man who needs to dress like a woman so that he can infiltrate a particular event. And although it's not a nudist event, and you would think that his junk down there would be more revealing than whether or not he has hair, they still go through this whole song and dance about how he has to remove all of his hair. And he's using an oil lamp, and they make all these ha 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 funny jokes about how he feels like a roast pig. The word is delphakion, which means roast pig. You know how they singe the hairs off of a pig, but it also is slang for a woman's vulva that has been singed to remove the hair. And like I say, I thought that this sounded crazy and uncomfortable. So I've gone and looked it up, and it turns out that hair singeing is still a thing. But you can definitely have it done if you go to a Turkish barber. They're likely to singe the hairs on your ears, and some people do it to singe their split ends. They believe that it holds the integrity of the hair together, and at one point they thought your hair was alive, and so all of the life essence would ooze out of it if you didn't cauterize the ends of the hair by singeing. And the other way they removed their hair was by plucking it, so using tweezers. Again, we go to Aristophanes to hear more about that. In Lysistrata, the women organized a strike. So they're discussing it, and she said, if we sat around at home all made up and walked past them wearing only our diaphanous underwear, with our pubes all plucked in a neat triangle, and our husbands got hard and hankered to ball us, but we didn't go near them and kept away, they'd sue for peace, and pretty quick, you can count on that. So they're specifically saying that they're plucking them into a neat triangle. They're not saying they're going completely bald, they're just grooming. But it's a class thing, because in contrast, lower class women don't trim their boobs. So again, we go to Aristophanes for the skin. In the Assemblywoman, Praxiteles says that slave girls should have to leave boobs trimmed like a woolen barn jacket. That is to say, long and unkempt. So maybe it was like a nicely groomed, neat triangle that was really all the rage, and not completely total depilation, hair removal, and not complete and total hair removal. Hair is really important in ancient Greek civilization. Obviously, they placed a lot of importance on it, going and painting their kouros with bright blue pubes. But it's important to us too, because mainly I think we've misinterpreted it. Over the centuries, as they've lost their paint, we haven't realized that there was any pubic hair on their females. And this is the origin of Western civilization. You know, Greek leads to Rome, which adopts Christianity, which basically spreads around as Western civilization. And when these white sculptures without their paint anymore are found in the Renaissance, those are lauded as perfection. And so we see these even today as what is meant to be. And we think that women are meant to look like Barbies. We have Praxiteles to thank for that. Thanks, Praxiteles. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. If you're enjoying the detangler, please do subscribe, leave comments, like this video. Any kind of interaction you do will help the algorithm to figure out that people want to hear more about hair.